I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened in Portland that Halloween. I wasn't crazy. I know how this sounds. I know what the report said. But I need you to believe that what I saw was real and that the 17 people who died that night didn't just lose their minds for no reason. Something came through that Halloween, something that fed on what it showed us, and I'm the only one left who can tell you the truth before they lock me away for good. It started 3 days before Halloween, October 28, 2008, in the Pearl District where I was working the night shift at Providence Hospital. I was an ER nurse back then, had been for 6 years, and I thought I'd seen everything. Overdoses, stabbings, the usual parade of human misery that walks through those doors at 2 a.m. But that Tuesday night, something different came in. Her name was Rebecca Cho, a graphic designer 31 years old, found by her roommate standing in their kitchen holding a chef's knife, carving something into her own forearm. Not cutting herself, carving. Methodical, precise lines that formed symbols I didn't recognize, her face completely blank, eyes open but not seeing anything in our world. When the paramedics brought her in, she was still trying to finish whatever pattern she'd started, fighting against the restraints, whispering the same phrase over and over. It's showing me the way through. I have to finish the door. We sedated her, stitched her up, sent her to psych. I figured drugs, maybe a psychotic break. I was wrong. The next case came in 6 hours later, just as my shift was ending. Marcus Webb, a high school teacher from Beaverton, brought in by police after his wife called 911. He'd been sitting in their garage for 3 hours, staring at the concrete wall, and when she finally got him to respond, he told her he could see something moving behind the wall, something that had been watching their family for weeks, something that was finally ready to come through. The cops found him trying to break through the concrete with a sledgehammer, tears streaming down his face, begging whatever he saw to take him instead of his kids. He had the same empty look Rebecca had, that 1,000-yard stare that goes right through you. Before they could get him into a room, he started screaming about the thin place and how Halloween was when the door opens widest. They had to give him enough Ativan to drop a horse before he finally went quiet. And even then his lips kept moving, forming words none of us could hear. I should have gone home. I should have clocked out and gone back to my apartment in Selwood, had a beer, watched some mindless TV, and forgotten about the crazy people in the ER. But something about those 2 cases bothered me, the timing, the similar presentations, the way they both talked about something coming through. I stayed late, checking admission records, and that's when I found 3 more cases from the previous night, all with similar symptoms: visual hallucinations, self-harm, obsessive behavior focused on opening or completing something. All of them admitted in the last 48 hours. All of them sedated and transferred to psychiatric care. I pulled their charts and read through the intake notes, and my hands started shaking when I realized they'd all said variations of the same thing. Something was watching them. Something was waiting for Halloween. Something was going to come through when the barrier was thinnest. I drove home as the sun came up, my head pounding, telling myself I was just tired, just seeing patterns where there weren't any. Portland's a weird city. We get our share of mental health crises, especially with the homeless population and the drug problems. 5 people having psychotic episodes in 2 days wasn't statistically impossible, but I couldn't shake the feeling in my gut, that primal instinct that tells you when something is fundamentally wrong with the world. I barely slept that day. Kept having dreams about standing in a dark room while something on the other side of the wall scratched and scratched, trying to find a weak spot to push through. When I went back to work that evening, October 29th, the ER was chaos. 12 more cases had come in during the day shift, all with the same presentation. People from all over the city, a lawyer from downtown, a barista from Hawthorne, a retired veteran from St. John's, a college student from Reed, no connection between them, no common location or demographic, just random people all experiencing the same delusion at the same time. They were seeing things, they said, figures in mirrors that didn't match their reflections, shadows that moved independently of any light source, faces pressed against windows that vanished when they looked directly at them. And all of them, every single one, insisted it was getting stronger as Halloween approached, that something was using the holiday as a gateway, feeding on the collective belief and fear and fascination with death and the supernatural that peaks on October 31st. Dr. Chen, the attending psychiatrist, called an emergency meeting with hospital administration. He wanted to know if there was a gas leak, a water contamination, something environmental that could cause mass hallucinations. The city sent inspectors, ran tests, found nothing. The police were getting calls from all over Portland, people reporting prowlers that vanished, break-ins where nothing was taken, but the residents swore someone had been standing over their beds watching them sleep. The 911 system was logging dozens of calls about someone in the house that turned up empty when cops arrived. And the suicides? God, the suicides started that day. 4 people in different parts of the city, all within a 6-hour window, all with notes that talked about going through early and meeting it halfway and becoming the door. I was checking on Rebecca Cho, she was still in the secure ward, when I saw it for the first time. Not through her eyes, through mine. I was standing in the hallway outside her room, reading her updated chart, when I caught movement in the window behind me. The window looked out onto the parking lot, and it was dark outside, the glass acting like a black mirror. In the reflection, I could see myself and the hallway behind me, but there was something else. A figure standing at the far end of the corridor, perfectly still, watching me. It was wrong. The proportions weren't quite human. The limbs too long, the head tilted at an angle that should have broken the neck. I spun around, heart hammering, but the hallway was empty. Just the normal sounds of the hospital, the distant beep of monitors, someone coughing in one of the rooms. When I looked back at the window, the reflection showed only what should be there, but my hands were shaking so badly I dropped the chart. That's when I knew they weren't crazy. That's when I understood that whatever was happening, whatever was coming through, I could see it too. And if I could see it, anyone could. It wasn't selecting specific people. It was showing itself to everyone, but most people's minds couldn't process it, couldn't accept what they were seeing, so they broke. They fractured rather than accept that reality had rules we didn't understand, that there were things that could exist in the spaces between what we call real and what we call impossible. I should have left the city that night. I should have gotten in my car and driven east until I hit Idaho, kept going until I was far enough away that whatever was concentrating in Portland couldn't reach me. But I'm stubborn and I'm a nurse and people were dying. So instead I started researching. I went to Powell's books during my break, found the occult section, started pulling everything I could find about Halloween, about thin places, about barriers between worlds. Most of it was garbage, New Age nonsense about veils and Samhain energy. But there were older texts, academic books about Celtic traditions and folk beliefs, that described Halloween not as a celebration, but as a defensive ritual. The jack-o'-lanterns weren't decorations, they were wards. The costumes weren't for fun, they were camouflage, ways to hide from things that walked on the night when the boundary between the living and the dead wore thin. The trick-or-treating, the noise, the lights, all of it was designed to keep something out, to maintain the barrier through collective action and awareness. But we'd forgotten. We'd turned it into a party, a commercial holiday, strip-mauled all the protection out of it, and left ourselves vulnerable. Halloween fell on a Friday in 2008, which meant the whole city was primed for maximum celebration. By the time I got to work that evening, October 31st, there were 23 people in psychiatric hold, all exhibiting the same symptoms, all deteriorating rapidly. The hallucinations were becoming tactile. They were feeling things touch them, grab them, pull at them. Rebecca Cho had scratched her arms raw, trying to remove what she said, were fingers wrapped around her wrists, fingers that left no marks, but that she swore she could feel, cold and wet and wrong. Marcus Webb had gone catatonic, his eyes moving rapidly like he was watching something move around his room, but he wouldn't speak, wouldn't respond to any stimulus. The newer patients were worse. They came in already half gone, minds shattered by whatever they'd seen, babbling about the procession and the hungry ones and the convergence. The city felt wrong that night. I could sense it the moment I stepped outside for air around 9 p.m. Portland's usually beautiful on Halloween. The old neighborhoods go all out with decorations. Families walking around in costume. That electric feeling of controlled chaos. But tonight, the air felt heavy, pressing down like a physical weight. The street lights seemed dimmer than they should be, and the shadows between them were darker, thicker, like something substantial rather than just an absence of light. I could hear children laughing in the distance, but the sound was off-key, slightly too high, slightly too sharp. And underneath everything, so low I felt it more than heard it, was a vibration, a frequency that made my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges. That's when the mass casualty alert came through. Multiple incidents across the city all at once. People attacking each other, people throwing themselves off buildings, people walking into traffic. The 911 system was overwhelmed. Every hospital in Portland was getting slammed, but Providence was getting the worst of it because we were the main psychiatric emergency facility. They started arriving in ambulances, in police cars, brought in by frantic family members. A mother who had stabbed her son because she said his face wasn't his anymore, that something was looking out through his eyes. A man who had set his apartment on fire because the walls were breathing and he had to cauterize the infection before it spread. A teenage girl who had swallowed drain cleaner because she said it had already gotten inside her and she had to poison it before it finished hatching. I was triaging in the ER when I saw it again, but this time it wasn't a glimpse in a reflection. This time it was standing in the waiting room, right in the middle of the crowd, and nobody else seemed to notice. It was tall, at least 7 feet, and its proportions were all wrong, limbs too long and jointed in too many places, head smooth, and featureless except for a mouth that stretched too wide, filled with teeth that looked like broken glass. It didn't move like it was walking. It moved like it was being pulled through space, jerking from one position to another, always slightly off-tempo with reality. And it was watching me. I could feel its attention like a physical thing, pressing against my mind. And when that mouth opened wider, I heard a sound that wasn't a sound, a frequency that bypassed my ears and went straight into my brain, showing me things, flashes of places that weren't places, geometries that hurt to perceive, vast spaces filled with things that writhed and reached and hungered. I stumbled backward, crashed into a medication cart, and when I looked again it was gone. But I could still feel where it had been, a cold spot in reality, and I understood then what was happening. They weren't hallucinations. They were glimpses. The barrier wasn't solid. It was more like a membrane, and on Halloween, when so many people were thinking about death and the supernatural, when the collective unconscious was focused on the boundary between worlds, it stretched thin enough that things could press against it from the other side. Most people couldn't perceive it, or their minds protected them by refusing to see. But some people were sensitive or unlucky, or had minds that couldn't look away, and what they saw broke them because human consciousness wasn't built to process something so fundamentally other. Dr. Chen found me in the supply closet where I'd gone to catch my breath. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last few hours, his hands shaking as he tried to light a cigarette, forgetting we were in a hospital. "It's not stopping," he said, his voice hollow. "We've got 47 in psychiatric hold, another 30 in the ER waiting to be admitted, and County Hospital just called. They're at capacity too. So is Adventist. So is OHSU. The police are saying it's city-wide, maybe regional. Seattle's reporting similar incidents. So is Sacramento. It's like someone flipped a switch and 20% of the population just broke. I wanted to tell him what I'd seen, wanted to explain that they weren't broken, they were just seeing something we weren't supposed to see. But the words wouldn't come, because even in my own head they sounded insane. Instead, I asked him what time it was. He checked his watch. 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes until midnight, until Halloween officially ended and November 1st began. 13 minutes until the holiday was over, and maybe whatever was pressing through would have to retreat. That's when the power went out, not just in the hospital, in the whole neighborhood. Through the windows I could see Portland go dark block by block, a wave of blackness spreading across the city, like someone was pulling a blanket over a dying fire. The emergency generators kicked in after a few seconds, but they only powered critical systems. Most of the hospital was dark, illuminated only by emergency lighting that cast everything in a sickly red glow. And in that darkness, I could see them clearly now. They were everywhere. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, standing in hallways, in rooms, pressed against windows, all of them perfectly still, all of them watching. They weren't in our world, they were just behind it, visible now because the barrier had worn so thin, and they were waiting for something. The screaming started at 11:52. Every patient in psychiatric hold, all of them screaming at once, a sound so full of terror and agony that it didn't seem human. Security tried to lock down the ward, but the doors wouldn't hold, not because the patients were breaking through, but because the locks kept failing, electronic systems going haywire, magnetic seals releasing for no reason. I ran toward the ward with Dr. Chen and 3 other nurses, and what we found there will haunt me until the day I die. They were all standing in the hallway, all 47 patients, arranged in a circle around one of those things. It was more solid than the others, almost fully present in our reality, and it was tall enough that its head brushed the ceiling tiles. The patients were chanting something in a language I didn't recognize, their voices perfectly synchronized, and as they chanted, I could see the thing becoming more real, more here, pulling itself through using their voices as an anchor. Rebecca. Cho was at the front of the group, her carved arms outstretched, bleeding from the wounds she'd reopened, and she was smiling. Not a human smile. Something wider. Something that showed too many teeth. Something that looked like the smile on the thing she was summoning. Dr. Chen grabbed the nearest phone to call security, but before he could dial, every single patient turned to look at us at the same time. 47 heads snapping in unison. 47 pairs of eyes that weren't quite right anymore, slightly too large, slightly too dark, reflecting light that wasn't there. And then they started walking toward us, still chanting, and the thing in the center of their circle took a step forward, and I felt reality buckle under its weight, saw the floor tiles crack where it placed its foot, smelled something like ozone and rot and metal. We ran. I'm not proud of it, but we ran, pulled the door shut behind us and jammed a crash cart against it, and then we kept running toward the main ER, shouting for everyone to evacuate. Behind us I could hear them coming, not just the patients, but dozens of footsteps, some of them making sounds that feet shouldn't make, clicking and scraping and wet sliding sounds. The emergency lighting was failing now, flickering, and in the strobing darkness I kept catching glimpses of those things everywhere, more and more of them pushing through, some of them wearing shapes that almost looked human, some of them not even trying to pretend. We made it to the ER and started evacuating whoever we could move, but it was chaos. People fighting us, people too sedated to walk, people who'd gone catatonic when the lights went out. I was helping a nurse move an elderly man on a gurney when I saw it in the window again. But this time when I looked over my shoulder, it was there in the room with us. Not a reflection, actually there standing between me and the exit, and it was looking at me with something that might have been curiosity or might have been hunger. I couldn't tell because its face kept shifting, features rearranging themselves, trying different configurations, like it was testing what would work in our reality. It reached for me, and I felt its fingers, if they were fingers, brush against my cheek, and the touch was so cold it burned, so wrong it made every nerve in my body scream. I could feel it trying to push into my mind, showing me things, offering me things, terrible knowledge and beautiful lies and promises of transformation. For a moment, just a moment, I understood what had happened to Rebecca and Marcus and all the others. They hadn't gone crazy. They'd been invited, shown possibilities, offered a chance to be part of something vast and old and hungry. And some, part of them had said yes, because the alternative was to live their whole lives, never knowing that there was anything more than this mundane reality. But I said no. I don't know why. Maybe I'm just stubborn. Maybe I'm too boring to tempt. Maybe some part of me loved this broken, mundane world too much to let it go. I jerked back, crashed into the gurney, and the old man I'd been trying to save grabbed my wrist and whispered, "Run, kiddo. They can't keep it open much longer. Just run." So I did. I ran through the hospital, past things I won't describe because I don't have words for them, through corridors that seemed longer than they should be, past windows that showed places that weren't Portland. I ran until I burst out through the ER entrance and into the parking lot. And even outside, the world was wrong. The sky was the color of a bruise, and there were stars that weren't stars, geometric patterns burning in the darkness above the city. I could hear screaming from every direction, sirens, crashes, the sound of breaking glass. Portland was tearing itself apart, reality coming undone at the seams as those things pushed through, and I was standing in the parking lot in my scrubs, watching my city die, and there was nothing I could do. Then, at exactly midnight, it stopped. Not gradually, just stopped like someone had flipped a switch. The sky snapped back to normal black, the wrong stars disappearing. The pressure in the air released so suddenly that my ears popped. I heard a sound like a massive door slamming shut, felt it in my chest, and suddenly the things were gone. Not fading away, just gone. Pulled back through whatever gap they'd been using, back to wherever they'd come from. The power came back on, streetlights blazing, and in the sudden brightness, Portland looked almost normal. Almost. But I could see the damage, broken windows, abandoned cars, people lying in the streets. The hospital behind me, dark and silent. I waited in that parking lot for 3 hours before the first responders arrived in force. They found 17 dead in the hospital, 12 patients and 5 staff, including Dr. Chen. The official cause was listed as mass psychotic episode with multiple fatalities. The news called it a riot, blamed drugs in the water supply that were never found, talked about mass hysteria and mob psychology. The survivors from the psychiatric ward had no memory of what happened, just blank spaces where Halloween night should be, their minds protecting them by erasing what they couldn't process. Rebecca Cho died 2 days later from infection in her self-inflicted wounds. Marcus Webb never spoke again, spent the rest of his life in a care facility staring at walls. The city pretended to move on, but anyone who was there that night knows the truth. Portland feels different now, thinner, like reality is stretched too tight, like whatever came through left marks we can't see but can feel. The suicide rate tripled in the weeks after Halloween. People stopped decorating for the holiday the next year. The hospitals have protocols now for October 31st. Extra security, psychiatric staff on call, emergency sedation kits pre-positioned. They don't say why. They don't have to. I can still see them sometimes in reflections and shadows in the corner of my eye. They're always watching, always waiting, testing the barrier, looking for weak spots. I think they're patient. I think they've been doing this for a very long time, maybe forever, pressing against reality when we give them openings, feeding on our fear and fascination with the unknown. Halloween was always a defense against them, a way to acknowledge their existence while keeping them at bay, but we forgot. We turned it into a joke, a party, and that night in 2008 we paid the price. They'll try again. Maybe next Halloween, maybe in 10 years, maybe in 100, whenever the conditions are right and enough people forget to be careful with the boundaries between worlds. And when they do, they'll push through again, and more people will break, and more people will die. And the rest of us will tell ourselves it was drugs or mass hysteria or anything except the truth. But I know the truth. I saw them. I felt their touch. And I'm writing this down now while I still can, before they come back for me. Because they will come back. I can feel them watching even now, pressing against the membrane of reality, whispering promises and threats in a language that bypasses words. They remember me. They remember that I said no. And they're very, very patient, so believe me or don't believe me. Call me crazy if you want, but when Halloween comes around, be careful. Lock your doors. Turn on all the lights. Don't look too long at shadows or reflections. And if you see something that shouldn't be there, something that doesn't quite fit in the corner of your eye, don't acknowledge it. Don't invite it in. Just close your eyes and wait for midnight to pass, because they're always there, just on the other side of reality. And Halloween. Halloween is when the door opens widest. I survived to tell you this, but I don't know how many more Halloweens I have left before they find a way to finish what they started. The barrier is still thin. They're still watching, and I'm running out of time.